Hello and welcome to the last R2D2 model tutorial. This one we're going to do the arm, which is a little bit more complicated, but in the basic steps we'll just make an extrusion, add a little curved part to it, a smaller extrusion below, put a hole in it, extrude a small cylinder, and then make a cut through that cylinder. As always, you can find these mechanical drawings on Canvas that lists all the dimensions as well as the paper manual on how to create this. So let's get started. Similar to the last one, we're going to start with a new part. We don't have a model to open, so if you're using a template or new part, make sure you use the correct units, which is millimeters. And we're going to start drawing on the right plane. So view your right plane, make sure you show it, and go normal to it. The first shape we're going to make is a center rectangle, and make sure you make that first center point on the origin of the 3D space. So make sure you get that orange circle when you click. And then we'll use Smart Dimension to make this rectangle 10 by 40 millimeters. Then we'll go right to extrude, and unlike extruding blind, we're gonna use a different option for here, which is mid-plane. So we set the extrude depth to 4 millimeters, and when we select mid-plane, it'll essentially split this. It'll extrude both front and back equal distance or half of 4 millimeters. So what that does is it keeps the extrusion we made bifurcated or right on center of the plane that we drew it on. And this will be useful later. We want to add a curved feature to the upper portion of this arm. So I'm going to go to Sketch, and I want to draw this on the same plane, the right plane. I'll select Centerline Arc. My first point will be the center of the edge of that top rectangle. The next click will be the exterior corner, and then I'll just follow and trace this arc to make a half circle and click the other exterior corner. And it's very important you get that little connection node indicating that these parts are connected. So we want to extrude this shape, and in order to do that, again, it has to be a closed vector or closed shape. So we have to add a straight line to both ends of that arc to make it a half circle. So I'll just use the straight line connector tool to do that. And like before, we're going to go to extrude. And similar to the previous shape, this should be 4 millimeter distant extrusion, and the direction should be mid-plane. That way it extrudes it on both sides of the front and back side of the right plane. And if you've never noticed it before, but the check mark that says merge result, it's going to combine this half cylinder with that rectangle, so there'll be one solid shape. Next, we're going to move our model down so we get to the bottom of, or the opposite side of where we made that curved portion. And I'll turn on the front plane so we can see essentially where like the middle intersection is of all the planes in this object. These next steps really emphasize where SOLIDWORKS can feel pretty unintuitive unless you've been initiated with its specific workflow. So we're gonna deselect anything by clicking outside of our object, and you can even hit escape a couple times just for the feel-good sense of nothing is selected. And I'm going to change my view orientation so I can see the bottom of this shape that I want to select. I'm going to click once on the bottom of that face. So that face is now selected, and you can see with the orientation I have with the two planes enabled, you can kind of see where the origin is and where the two planes bifurcate them. So that origin point exists, and it's carried up through the intersection of those two planes. That's where I want to make my center rectangles first click on the bottom face of this part. So this is that workflow that if you get that little icon saying these two things are going to be coincident, then you've done it correctly. And it might take a couple tries of deselecting to just get your workflow in the order that SOLIDWORKS prefers. So I'm just going to draw that center rectangle, and it's going to be dimensioned 3 millimeters by 8.5 millimeters. And we're just going to extrude this outward or down, and that'll be 10 millimeters in length. So I'm going to reorient my view. I'll hit the spacebar and go to the right side view, because next we're going to essentially draw some reference geometry here. So up in the features toolbar, I'll select reference geometry. I'm going to click axis. And if I click the top part of this curve, it's automatically going to know I want some cylindrical or conical faces being selected. And since I've selected axis, it's going to understand to put the axis in the middle of that cylindrical curve. And this reference point is essentially what we need to find the center of the hole we're going to make. To make that hole, we're going to use something new, and this is the hole wizard. You'll see the hole wizard a little bit more in week 2's lecture, but for now we're going to get just a brief introduction to it. So I'll select hole wizard, and I'm going to select counterbore, and then we have a bevy of options of what type of hole you want to do. So just briefly, we're going to do, the standard will be anti-metric, the type will be hex screw. Under hole specifications, we're going to do M2 size, a normal fit, and the end condition is going to be through all. So we're going to make this hole through any existing geometry. The next tab is going to be positions, and this is again where SOLIDWORKS is a little finicky as far as what you've selected or how you're selecting it. So my first click is going to be the face of what I want to draw on, which is the face closest to us in our view. And I'm trying to select that axis, which was my reference geometry, but it's not showing up. The feature tree is now present in the model view, and if I click this drop-down tab, I can see all the features, including the reference geometry that I just made. So I'll click that, and when it shows up, I should be able to put the center point of this hole on the top of the axis, and you should be able to see the coincident icon showing up that these are going to be placed on top of each other, and this is what you want to do. So if you don't see this, again, just repeat this workflow. Maybe you have something wrong selected, but this should come up. Of course, there's other ways to do this. This all depends on your workflow and your thought process when you visualize and build a model. I'll accept that hole position. You can see I've got a counterbore and a M2 hole already made for me. So this is using the hole wizard is a very fast way to make holes wherever you want. So we're going to flip this model around and look at the opposite side of what we've been working on. I'm going to disable a plane, so I don't want it in view. And we're just going to draw 2 circles on this face. So I'll select that face, and the first circle, I want the center point. It should automatically recognize that there's a center point there because we have a circle feature present. I want that center selected as my first reference of my first circle, and I'm going to make that outer diameter match that diameter of that hole. I'll make another circle and just arbitrarily click somewhere, and this diameter is going to be 6.5 millimeters in diameter. So with these 2 circles present in my sketch, I'll just go right to Extrude Base Boss. And SOLIDWORKS automatically knows that it looks at boundaries at sketches. It's going to make this hollow cylinder as an extrusion. And this is going to be 2.6 millimeters in height as far as extrusion. And again, we're merging these results. It's all going to be one solid shape. We have one last step to make this, and conceptually this can be a little bit weird. So I'm going to change my orientation, remove some of my planes, and re-enable the top plane view. And I'm going to go normal to it. So you should be looking top down on this arm that we just made. I'm going to go to Sketch, and I'm going to draw a circle, and I want to make sure the center of that circle starts at the center of my part. And you should see a dotted line form between the free space origin, and that should extend out to your first click. And I'm just going to make an arbitrary size and make this circle 30 millimeters in diameter or 15 millimeters in its radius. Now the distance between the center of the circle and this next face feature is very important where you click. So we want the center of the circle, and we want the closest face of the last feature we just extruded. And that's going to be 14.85 millimeters. So when you make that, you should just see a little overlap. And that little overlap is what we're going to extrude cut from. So we'll go to extrude cut. And we can change that direction to blind, flip it so we're cutting up. And you should just see a little bit of overlap. If you want to do it the more efficient way, the direction that we're going to cut is up to next. So we're just going to extend this until we get through some geometry. And that will highlight what we're cutting. So do up to next, and it should cut through. And if we reorient our view from the top plane looking down, you should see it just barely cut out that little section. And this little section is what we're going to use to mate the arms of R2D2 to the body. You should note that the diameter of this cutout is the same diameter of R2D2's body. So that concludes making the arm, and you're going to save this as your Android ID R2D2 Arm 1.